All right, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who saw us in the real webinar, you know that I was not even dressed this way. So we'll be honest and say, because of the recording snafu, uh, Courtney reached out to ask if I could record the webinar again. So this is a re-recording of the webinar, and I'm going to do my best to put myself in the mindset that you all are here with me and I'm talking with you. So bear with us, as this might be a little bit different, but I promise that all of the key points and the major things that we were going to talk about, we'll talk about again. So this is Lead Now, Part 3, how to determine your priorities and combat decision-making fatigue, which is decision-making fatigue is a real thing in our everyday lives, especially as leaders. We're constantly making decisions. It's most certainly a real thing, though, when we're in crisis and we feel like there's 1,000 things coming at us at once. So like every other week, let's ask the question, why are we here? We're here because we are in a crisis. And today, we're here because we're going to talk about the decisions that we make today. They determine our story for tomorrow. Our decisions are important, small ones and big ones. And many of us react to decisions in different ways. And the biggest thing I think I want everyone to walk away with is this idea of don't be indecisive. Jim Rohn says indecision is the thief of opportunity. Thanks, Courtney. She's controlling for me. You're totally fine, by the way. Indecision is the thief of opportunity. If there's probably one main point that I want you to walk away with today, the biggest thing is not to live in a state of indecisiveness. It will eventually, it's harmful to you, it's harmful to your organization. So I want to encourage you on how to evaluate decisions, how to make decisions, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what are we going to accomplish today? You're going to understand some of the reasons why we as humans tend to avoid decisions. We're going to talk about, at the end, you will know ways that will help you determine your organization's priorities and what they should be. I'm going to give you some practical, tangible ways to prioritize. You'll also be able to hopefully prioritize your own priorities as a leader, which is incredibly important. Every day you're faced with a list of to-dos. You need to be able to know how to prioritize those. And you'll be able to identify 7 ways you can practice good decision-making and combat that decision-making fatigue. I think oftentimes decision-making fatigue is something we don't even sometimes consciously realize, like the amount of decisions we make in a day ends up exhausting us. But when you think about it, we're making decisions from the time we wake up. The very first decision you make is when your alarm goes off, or maybe it doesn't, your body just wakes up. But regardless, you make that decision of, do I get out of bed or do I stay in bed? So you're literally making decisions all day long, whether you realize it or not. And sometimes, especially I think in crisis, because again, crisis tends to be a catalyst for many things and exaggerate or catapult many things, that when you know you have a lot of bigger decisions coming and you're constantly thinking about them, it ends up being exhausting. So I want you to walk away today equipped with how to make good, wise, sound decisions and not be overwhelmed and exhausted and not feel like you have to run away from it. We can go to the next slide, Courtney. So let's start with talking about this growing problem of indecisiveness. If you can see in the presentation there, it's a skull, like holding his face, thinking about a decision. He basically died thinking about how to make a decision. And essentially, the reason we use this image is because if you think about this image as your organization, if you continue to be indecisive, especially as a leader, it eventually will kill your organization. You have to be able to make decisions, whether or not it is in your natural DNA to be decisive. Not everyone is high on the decisiveness scale of the disc, and some of you are, which is wonderful. But not everyone is, and that's okay. You don't have to be high on the decisiveness scale to be a great leader, but you do have to be able to make decisions. Let's start with this fact that we've talked about before, that change is inevitable, and with change so comes decisions, and therefore decisions are inevitable. These are some of the top reasons, so we can't run from it. These are some of the top reasons we do tend to either be paralyzed by decisions or run from decisions. Number one, too many options. In our day and age, there are thousands of things that come at us every day, thousands of options that we have, and sometimes we can feel paralyzed or overwhelmed by the number of options we have, that we just end up not making a decision. The illusion of perfection. So especially I think especially now when we are on our screens a lot, we see every bump, scrape, and bruise that we have in our organization, in our lives. And we see the highlights and the best of everyone else when we're looking on social media. So it gives us this illusion of perfection, which makes us fear imperfection. And it makes us try to avoid it. So then we don't make a decision on something just because we don't want to be imperfect, versus embracing the fact that we're going to make mistakes. Number three, this fear of failure. It's a very real thing. And I think especially for leaders, it is incredibly, especially now, very real, this fear of possibly having to close your doors. Or there's so many areas where we can feel like we're failing, therefore we don't like that feeling, so we try to avoid it, and then we have this fear, and therefore then we don't make decisions. Number four, uncertainty. Sometimes we just feel like, I don't know if I can make a decision because I don't have enough information. And then your uncertainty about something makes you indecisive. Number five, lack of practice. I definitely believe that decision making is a skill, something we build up over time. It's like our muscles. We can build our decision making muscles over time. Passivity cannot be an option. Do not be passive. Do not be paralyzed by decision making. I want to encourage you. It's okay. We're going to fail. We're going to embrace this. And it'll be okay. But making a decision is better than not making one at all. Now we're going to talk about how to determine your organization's priorities. This is especially important, I think, right now. Everybody is facing all these different options, and you're trying to think, where do we focus our time? Or maybe you just feel like you're reactive all the time. We've talked about that a lot in this series. So helping you identify what your organization's priorities are will hopefully help you focus and help you in decision making, because once you know what your focus is, it helps guide your decisions. There is a model, there is a author and professional named Patrick Lencioni. He wrote the book The Advantage. He also wrote like the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I really love his work. The Advantage is where this idea comes from, and I love this concept, and I use it a lot. I use it a lot with organizations and strategic planning. I want to clarify, though, this is not strategic planning. Strategic planning is looking at the next 3, 4, 5 years at a time. What we're going to look at here is something that is 9 months or less in duration. It impacts your strategic plan goals because hopefully you're determining priorities based on what you've said where you want to be in 3, 4, 5 years. So that's where they go hand in hand. But this is really looking at one singular rallying cry at a time that is embraced and shared by everyone in your organization, and it has a fixed time period, normally shorter than 9 months. Essentially, this is answering the question, what is most important for our organization right now? What is that next most important thing right now? Courtney, can you quickly go back to the next slide, and then we'll go back to this one. Sorry, the advantage model. There we go. Yeah. So a thematic goal is your single qualitative rallying cry that's shared by all members of the team for a fixed period of time. And then you're going to have defining objectives, and those objectives are temporary qualitative components of your thematic goal that are also shared by the entire team. And then you have standard operating objectives, and these objectives are ongoing priorities for your organization shared by the entire team. These are things that are important to identify, because once you identify your standard operating objectives, this is basically the things that you have to do, your team has to do every single day to operate. That's like revenue and expenses. Revenue and expenses is an everyday thing. If you're a therapeutic riding center, for example, that's horse care. That's an everyday standard operating objective. You have to do it. What's important here is once you're able to identify your standard operating objectives, then when you're talking about your thematic goal, you have a better idea of understanding the difference between a goal that might be important all the time versus a goal that is important right now, the next most important right thing. So Courtney, if you could go back to that previous slide. I'm sorry. This is the only area we need to jump around. One question, if it's always important, it's not the thematic goal. So that's why it's important to identify the standard operating objectives and the defining objectives with your thematic goal. I'm going to send a template, a worksheet. Courtney's going to send a template, a worksheet with this follow-up email with the recording. It comes from Patrick Lantrioni in the table group. So you'll have a template to work with, and you'll be able to visually see what I'm talking about. But one question you can ask your team as you wrestle with making this decision is, if we do not accomplish fill in the blank, we have failed. So that's one way to look at what is the next most important right thing. I think it's really important to pull in your entire team, wrestle with this question. Conflict is okay. It's good. It can bring you closer together. As long as we're, being respectful in conflict. But this model and the link that you'll have, the template worksheet you'll have, will really help you in determining a single focus for the next 9 months or less. I typically recommend 6 to 9 months, but it could be 3 months, it could be 2 months, it really depends on whatever the goal is that you set. But I do recommend 9 months or less, because oftentimes when we start to creep into the 1 year time frame, we kind of can lose momentum, and momentum is king when we're talking about goals and priorities, because when we reach our goals, we feel really empowered and we feel excited. So we want to be able to accomplish the goals we set and then set the next goal. So essentially what I always encourage organizations to do is look at 9 months or less at a time, and then you reset. You come up with the next thematic goal. You come up with your next playbook. Essentially, this should just be one page. It's a visual one-pager that everyone on your team can see at all times, knowing what the thematic goal is. And then like your second page is pretty much the delegation page, where you say who's going to do what during this time. Okay, Courtney, we can go to a few slides ahead now. Now let's talk about how to determine your own priorities as a leader, which is really important because every day, like we already talked about, we are bombarded with decisions and tasks, and we want to be proactive. This is an area you have control. When we don't have control over the economy and over so many things, you have control over what you, how you prioritize your day and what you accomplish in every day. Um, I like this model. There are lots of models for decision making. I like asking these questions though. 3 R's of personal decision making. Number one, what is required of me? I think it's incredibly important for you to know as a leader at the end of the day, what is your specific responsibilities? What are your specific responsibilities and requirements? Not the requirements of your, well, you need to know the requirements of your team members, but you specifically, at the end of the day, what are the things that only you can do? And I'm going to encourage you to make only the decisions you can make and delegate the rest. Number two, what is the greatest return? So what areas provide the greatest return on investment for yourself personally and for your organization? Number three, what yields the greatest reward? So this is mostly like intrinsic. So what are the things that you really love versus the things that you really hate? I encourage people to ask these 3 questions in this order, because we can't just skip to reward and skip over our responsibilities and what's required of us. So I think it's really important we ask those in that order. This is one method that I like. Again, there's a lot of different methods when it comes to prioritizing your day. I've also talked about the fact that I personally use, and in our company, we use a task management system called Asana. So I use Asana to help with this, but this is called Eat the Frog. It comes from a Mark Twain quote: if it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. Essentially meaning, when you think about what is required of you in your leadership role, you need to prioritize those things every day. If it's your job to do it, do that first. Make that the first priority. I love writing. That maybe that's something maybe not all of you know about me, but I really enjoy writing. And so I read about writers, and I've done like some podcasts and blogging, where I'm just learning about writing a lot. And one of the things that I often hear professional authors teach other people is that if you want to be a writer, you need to write every day. You need to treat it like it's a job, and you need to prioritize it. Otherwise, you don't become better at writing if it's just something, a hobby you do once or twice a week. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to your role at your organization in leadership. When you are able to determine what is required of you, what are the things that only you can do, and you know what your job is, then you're able to prioritize those each day. You can make a daily list of your tasks or use like Asana, your task management system, and then prioritize those based on knowing, what is required of you, where's the greatest return, where's the greatest reward. And then Craig Rochelle, especially during times of crisis, recommends to just set 3 daily goals and work on only accomplishing 3 goals. You can end up accomplishing more than 3, but if you accomplish 3 and you only set 3, it's like under promise, over deliver, and that makes us feel really good. Versus over promising and under delivering, we eventually start to feel defeated because we set 10 goals for ourselves in a day. We're taking care of our kids. We're only working an hour or 2 hours at a time and rotating with our spouses, and it's just difficult. So if you set 3 goals during the day and you accomplish more, that's fantastic. But even if you still just accomplish those 3 goals, you feel so much better than if you ended the day and you weren't able to accomplish half of your list because you set 10 goals. 7 ways we're going to talk about 7 ways to help you make decisions now. So we're moving from how to set and determine priorities to actually decision-making skills and tips. Number 1, avoid either or scenarios. When you are faced with a situation that is you feel like you have to do this or this, and you feel like there are only 2 options, the psychological and emotional pressure rises and increases because you start to feel trapped. And oftentimes we don't realize that we feel that way when we're faced with an either or scenario. I always encourage teams to do your best to come up with at least a third option. We used to do this at Agape all the time. If we were faced with a situation where we felt like we only had 2, we would talk together and I would say, we have to come up with a third. We're not going to make a decision until we come up with at least 3 or 4 options. We're not just having 2. And I can tell you from my experience, I cannot remember a single situation in which we were not able to come up with at least a third option. There may be situations where there are literally only 2, but as often as possible, expand your options. Tip number 2, become your own personal advisor. So many times, especially in leadership, because we are so close to the situation, we love our team members, we love our organizations, and we give so much to them. We give so much of our passion and our energy to our teams and our organizations that sometimes we're a little too close and it feels cloudy and we feel like we can't be a little more objective. So place yourself in the mindset of being your own personal advisor. Ask yourself the question of, what would I tell myself to do in this situation? If a friend were sitting on the other side across from me and we were talking about this for them, what would I advise? What would I encourage? What questions would I ask them? Oftentimes it's good for us to ask more questions and not just quickly come up with an answer. So what kind of questions would I ask them? What would a great leader do? If you have someone that you admire, you respect, or a successor that did a really great job, ask yourself, what would he or she do? Be your own personal advisor. Try to place yourself in that situation. And oftentimes journaling is a great way to get your thoughts out when you're thinking through these questions. There's a great quote, I can never remember who it's by, but it's thoughts disentangle themselves from the lips through the fingertips. So essentially, I probably just butchered that, but essentially the idea is that oftentimes, writing down our thoughts, writing down our responses helps clear our mind and make things more clear. Number 3, I think. Decide when you are going to decide. So this is setting a deadline for decisions. Craig Rochelle recommends, and I think it's a great practice, to make 2 lists. You have your to-do list, your tasks that you have to do, and then a to-decide list. So these are decisions, let's say in a given week, that you need to make. You have your to-do list, your to-decide list. Give yourself a deadline for your to-decide list and make all those decisions the same time. I think I've heard Craig Rochelle say he has an actual, I don't do this, but he does this, and he's a great leader. He actually has a day every week where he makes all his decisions. It's like Thursday or something, and that's when he makes all his decisions for his organization. But procrastination is the enemy of progress. So if you are someone who struggles with making decisions, give yourself a deadline, hold yourself accountable to that, and decide. Come to a decision point. Number 4, 5. I don't know what number we're on. Take the long view. This is another book that I really recommend. It's by Simon Sinek. He's the author of Start With Why. I love his stuff. His most recent book is called The Infinite Game. And in The Infinite Game, he references this idea of indecision making. Let's always remember the long view and not just the short-term view. So I think especially in crisis, this is something we always have to remember. What are the effects and the outcomes of the decisions we make today when this crisis is over? We've talked a lot about that. And with that comes asking the question, what is best for our people? He's referencing, for-profit companies and putting people before profit. But I think this question can be in regards to all of our stakeholders. Our people are not just our team members and our staff members. It's also our participants and our donors and our volunteers. So when we're faced with certain decisions, and we should think about the long view and think about, in the long run, does this decision impact our donors in the long run? Not just now. What is the long-term effect? Maybe the long-term effect is nothing, and that makes the decision easier, which that goes to my next point. This is probably my favorite, so I should have put it first, but I use this all the time. And this is also something that I've encouraged and taught other leaders for a long time. But weigh each solution on 4 scales. So you have these 4 scales: your cost, your value or your ROI, return on investment, your risk profile timeline, and your impact and your reach. Each 4 of those are typically in at least most larger decisions or seemingly larger decisions that you need to make for your organization. This could be a programmatic decision. You're debating whether or not to introduce a new program, or maybe it's try out a new CRM or donor management system. You can weigh that decision on these 4 scales. So what is the cost of this decision? Both fixed and hard and soft costs. What's the value or return on investment? The forecasted value or return on investment. What is your risk profile? So that means how much time do you have to make a decision before things may turn negative or sour. That's your risk profile timeline. Your timeline in which you have somewhat of a cushion before things start going south. That's really important for you to know, especially with some of the bigger decisions. And then impact and reach. How many people does this impact, and or how many people does this reach or affect? The take time that is appropriate to the impact of the decision. So basically, once you understand how many people it affects, the more time or less time you should take to make that decision. If it's something that is only, let's say it's trying out a task management system, you can try it out. You can do a free trial. You can test it out with just you or a few other team members. It doesn't really impact or reach your external stakeholders at the time, and your risk profile is somewhat low because you have a fairly large amount of time to implement a task management system without something going south. To me, a decision like that should be an easy one. You just say yes or you say no, because it only impacts a few people. The cost is really low. So it's low cost, low distraction, low impact. But eventually it could have a great impact on your team if it's something that works out really well. So that decision could be easier than a decision such as introducing a new program to your organization where it's going to impact more people. It's going to have a greater cost. But it could also have a greater return on investment. So weigh your decisions on these scales, and the greater the cost, the greater the return on investment, the shorter the risk profile timeline, and the greater the impact or the reach, then the longer you should take to make that decision. Fire bullets, then cannonballs. This kind of segues from the previous one, and this idea comes from another great book, Jim Collins' Great by Choice. a really fantastic book. He talks about how the greatest companies know when and what to change. It is intentional, calculated, and tested. It's not reactive. It's not full of emotion. Um, and it's also practiced. So basically, you're practicing failing and you're failing forward. You're learning from your mistakes. I used to call the barn at Agape, this was our barn laboratory. It's okay for us to practice things, but we're going to practice with bullets before we fire that cannonball. So we're going to try things out. We're going to tweak it. We're going to improve it, evaluate it. And then once we know it can be successful, we launch the big thing. So fire bullets, practice decision making, practice failing, and you start with the smaller things. So the smaller things that have low cost, low distraction, start with those, and that'll help you um, develop your decision making muscles. Last, but I think is probably one of the biggest areas and the most helpful, would be delegate. I referenced this earlier, so I'm going to take a little bit more time on delegation. But you can avoid decision making fatigue by delegating as many decisions as you can to your team. And when you delegate to your team, it not only helps you because you don't have to make as many decisions, but it empowers your entire organization and your entire team to lead. It is empowering when you are delegated something. And the other thing we do is we train up and we lead up problem solvers, not problem makers. We want team members that dive in and want to tackle solving problems, because problems are inevitable. But we don't want people who just constantly bring up problems and don't have the mindset of figuring out solutions. I'm going to go through a delegation checklist with you, and I want to clarify. That's on the next slide, Courtney. I want to clarify to you that I am not talking about delegating to, let's say you have just brought someone on, maybe not in this time, but you've just brought someone on, they've been there a few weeks, and suddenly you hand over like this entire project to them. They're brand new, they're just learning the organization, and you're just really learning more about them and their competence. And trust is being built, trust is developing. I am not talking about delegating big things and big decisions without a trust and a competence. There has to be trust and competence, and those things come over time as a team member proves themselves. That's the reality. So here's a way to work on delegating and to increase delegation and increase responsibility to someone over time as trust and competence develops over time. First step, you want to communicate the why to the person you're delegating to and what it means to you. Why are you delegating this to them? Why them? Why this project? And what it means to you to let this go and trust them in delegating this task or project to them. Let them know your expectations. I always say, if they don't know your expectations and it doesn't come out as you want or expect, then that falls on you first as the leader. I cannot tell you how many times I have apologized throughout the years because something is not what I wanted or expected, but it's my fault because I did not communicate clearly from the beginning what I did expect. So if you don't communicate your expectations and it doesn't come out as you expect, that is on you, and you have to own that as the leader. Demonstrate then how to do the task. This may not be like physically doing it. And I know that this is often the reservation with delegation, because we say to ourselves as leaders, well, I'll have to end up doing it anyway, so why am I going to delegate? Well, the idea here is that if you demonstrate how, at least part of how you want it to be done, the most important parts, then the next time they go to do it, they know, that team member knows how how it's supposed to be done and what the expectations are. So the idea is hopefully you only have to do it once or twice. And this could be as simple as like you give them a template so they know what to fill in. Let's say you need them to research all logistics for a conference for your team. You need hotel options, you need travel options, etc. And you want it organized in a way that is easy for you to digest, easy to make quick decisions on, can we do this or can we not? You can provide them with a template that says, or at least an outline that says, we need at least 3 options for travel. We need, and all the costs related to it. We need at least 3 options for accommodations and the related costs. And then I want you to also give me what you recommend and think that we should do, what your top recommendation is based on finances and efficiency and comfortability for our team. Then when they bring that to you, you're then able to say, what do you recommend? What do you think? And that helps them understand how to also make decisions and how to come to you with solutions and not come to you with just problems. Be available for questions throughout. If you're not available and they have a question, then again, if it comes back and it's not what you expect, it's on you. Provide regular feedback and check-ins. If they're not coming to you with status updates or progress or check-ins, you need to go to them. Sometimes it can feel intimidating to a team member when you've been delegated a task and it's important. It might feel like I want to prove myself, so I'm not going to ask a question. But again, you need to be the one then who steps in and says, how are you doing? What can I help you with? Do you have any questions? And then trust them by only approving the big decisions and checking results. So, don't micromanage how they're doing it throughout the process of that task. But at the end, ask them, what do you think? What's your recommendation? And then you only approve that final big decision and you check on the results. That's a great way to grow your team and grow delegation. Courtney, you can go to the application guide. We'll skip questions because there's really no one on here right now. So just like we've talked about the past 3 weeks, the application guide is like the paint in your can. Until you open it and put it on a brush and start putting it on the wall, it just sits in the can. So really these concepts are not useful to you unless you actually apply them. So here are lots of questions that you can go through to help you understand what are your priorities, what are your organization's priorities, how you can delegate, what can be eliminated, what are you not good at, weighing against the 4 scales. I highly encourage you to use these questions. In our follow-up email, we're going to include the 3 books that I recommended and referenced during this webinar, as well as a link to the playbook model from The Advantage with Patrick Lencioni. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for your time, not just this week, but for the past 3 weeks. I do not take it lightly that you chose to take time out of your day to be with me and to listen to me. I spent quite a bit of time preparing because I wanted to make this practical, missional, and financial ways for you to kind of be in battle in this crisis and win the battle at the end. So know that we are with you, we are for you, and I'm truly grateful to Donate as well for having me. They are fantastic, and if you haven't looked into their donor engagement services, I want to highly recommend them. So thank you all so much for your time. If you made it to the end of this webinar for maybe the second time, thank you so much, and I am sure that we will be in touch, and I wish you and your organizations the very, very best.